guys, it's Jordan, and today I'm going to be talking to you about how to make Prodigy style, old school, rave, techno music, whatever you want to call it. We're going to be talking about the Jilted Generation style, and I want to say also, we're going to be talking more, not just about like, okay, here's the gear they use, the exact drum machine, this is the exact synth they use, all that. It's not about that. It's more so about like how we can kind of take that perspective and that style of track making, but make it in a modern way, and also apply that to modern track making. Because obviously, I don't really think there's much of a use for a video where I just make exactly that and just show you exactly the hardware they use and all that kind of stuff. Like, that's not really what it's about. It's about learning how to, like I said, kind of apply this style to more modern stuff and kind of like bring it into our perspective. As usual, you can get the full project files, samples, MIDI, presets, everything like that from this video is right at the top of the description for just $5. And if you're patient on my Patreon, check there because it's already available. Thank you so much for the support, guys, and let's dive in. Alright, so right off the bat, we've got the kick up here. You know, just a nice punchy 909 kick is pretty much what they were using. And pretty much what you want to use for this style of stuff, right? Like, we could go and maybe get like a different style of kick. But I think just really sticking to like a fat, powerful 909 sample, even straight out of the drum machine if you've got it. And then just kind of like, it's really just about leveling that out. Like, back in the day, they weren't doing all this extra, like, compression and saturation and stuff on the kicks. Like, it was really just a lot more of, like, okay, here's the kick coming out of the 909. It's loud enough. We don't need to do all this extra processing to it. So that's kind of the approach here. But you can see it's pretty much, like, the loudest thing in the mix. So it's really, like, still gonna punch through there. Then we have the bass line. So you can hear this really, you know, sort of classic style of like old school trancey bass line, almost very ravey as well, since we're at like a faster tempo. And you can hear that's the groove with the kick. So it's just this dun 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 dun, kind of just like an interesting but very simple groove that can just repeat over and over and over. And the other thing is that that's going to groove really well with a lot of these other elements, right? Like all those percussions, even the lead. If you get rid of the bass, it's missing a lot of groove there without that. So, even though the bass line is probably the thing that's like tucked away the most, obviously, you know, if you get rid of it, it's going to be a bit weak. But one thing I have noticed that these more old school style tracks, the bass isn't as like crazy shaking the speakers. Like, it's just more like it's in there so that you have the low end, but it's not like, you know, right up in your face to where it's gonna be just constantly grabbing your attention and taking away from everything. So then on the sound on that one, it's made using wavetable. We have a saw wave and then a square wave here. So that's a good way to get that like fat trancy bass, because like we do just a saw wave. Obviously that's nice and punchy, it's got a good tone to it, but there's just something in the low end that square wave adds that I really like. And yeah, and then we just have a low pass, which has an envelope on it. Now the key to this one is just having this like quicker envelope, like having it just quickly go down. Like if we turn this back up, like this is the default setting. See, it kind of throws off the groove. You need that tight, short sound like that. And then we just have a compressor, side chaining it a little tiny bit to the kick. And then this EQ in here is just cutting out everything below 30 hertz. This might seem kind of odd to do, but basically it's just because we can't hear anything below 20 hertz. And really, I find that if you do this around like, anywhere between like 30 to 45, it kind of makes your bass line feel a bit more airy. Like if I get rid of this, it has like those deep lows, but it feels like it's kind of weighing the track down now. Versus when we add this, we still have the bass in there, it's just not like, for some reason it just doesn't, like, the best way I can put it is it feels like, without this, it's like there's an anchor that's like pulling the ship, almost like pulling the ship down into the water, and then with this, the boat can just nicely go along the ocean. And yeah, then we have the drums, which are actually probably more simple than you would imagine. So as you can hear, a lot of energy happening from these, but essentially it's just 4 main layers here. So the first one is just this like old school sampled ravey kind of loop, you know, very much the type of stuff you hear in a lot of those old school tracks, you know, whether you get it sampled from like an old house or techno track, or even like an old hardstyle track or something crazy like that, or like trance. Or if it's just like a live loop, you just need to have something that's kind of like a loop that's more live and more like there's just so much movement happening there. And there's like layers upon layers and generations upon generations of samples just being added on top of each other to create this nice loop. And you really only get that from that sample loop. Then we have this hi-hat, which you can hear is just on the upbeats, you know, pretty simple stuff. I did shorten it a little bit, just like a nice 909 hi-hat, and then I just made it a little bit shorter and tighter. And then we have the clap. And so this is just an 808 clap, you know, again, sticking with the simple drum machine sounds. Like pretty much all the drums we've seen so far are just 909, 909 again, and then 808 here. The secret to this one is the distortion, because obviously you need this to really punch through the mix, right? Like you do that, like that huge hard hit there. And so just like a dry clap isn't really going to do that. And even if we turn it way up, you just don't get that out of it. So that's where the overdrive comes in. We're just distorting it a bunch. And then the secret to this is using the amplitude envelope on simpler. The reason why is if I set this back to the default setting, check out what happens. So you get that, which can sound kind of cool. That's a great sound, but it can sound kind of cool sometimes. But obviously, like if you just have that on top of this mix, like, it's kind of taking away more than it's helping. So we just shorten that, and now we just get that. And the last percussion layer that we have down here is actually this low percussion. So this might seem a bit odd on its own if I play it with the kick and like the hi-hat. So as you can hear, this is very busy. What it is it's just a drum rack with these 3 different like low percussion sounds in here. And then what's happening is it's just constantly going, right? Like it's pretty much just constantly firing off notes like that. And then what happens is it's one that's kind of creating a nice groove. Like if you listen to it with the lead, you know, it's almost like call and response with the lead there, right? Like the way that this grooves. And if you look at the notes, you'll notice that a lot of the main hits inside of this low percussion drum rack here are like the same main hits from the lead. So we're kind of like, you know, it's not just about like adding this just to add some percussion, but it's about adding this because it's going to contrast another sound in here. And not only that, but another sound that's not even in the drum section. So it's kind of like just little stuff like this that's going to make the whole track feel like it really fits together. Because you can also make a version of this where like it's just a bunch of random percussion and you don't really know what's going on and it doesn't really groove. And the whole track is going to be thrown off then. It's all about how this different background layer can kind of fit with that lead. And it doesn't always have to be low percussion either, you know, but just kind of when you're making a track, thinking about that and keeping that in mind, like how the different elements can fit together even if they're not in the same sort of group. And the other thing is it kind of fills in a bit of space with that loop, right? Because we have like this is all the drums. That's good, but it's very like right? Like there's no like real punchy drums except for the kick. As you can hear, this is just adding like so much energy in there. And yeah, then we have the lead. Now I was going for Voodoo People style with this for sure, and I think we got pretty close. I'm going to show you guys some secrets to making the lead. Now the first thing you want to keep in mind with this lead, as much as you might hear it and think that it is one, it's not a 303. I repeat, it is not a 303. A lot of times, and I had this problem too, because when I first started making this project, I thought it was a 303 as well, and I tried a bunch of different ones. It's not. It has that 303 kind of character to it, and that's how you want to think about it a little bit when you're processing it. I'll show you what I mean. But it's really like, it's not that, and it's a little bit of a different way that it's being made. So for the notes here, this is the pattern. So the first thing that I think is important to keep in mind is that this lead, if you just play, you know, like that kind of a lead where it's just like the same simple notes. Like that doesn't really sound that good. You need something rhythmic and really like, it should kind of be almost like a 303 pattern, right? Like that's what this is. It's taking that 303 type of pattern, but then just doing like the next level with it. Like, and you can hear that. Like it's very much like got that same kind of feel to it, and we want to program it like that, but it's not a 303. So what I've done here is you can see, like in terms of the notes, it's all gonna be pretty simple stuff. We're in the key of G sharp minor. So right, so we got like G sharp, another G sharp. Then there's A, which we also have down there, which is technically not in that G sharp minor scale, but it's kind of like just breaking it a little bit to get that more like dark, ravey sort of feel out of things. And yeah, and then we have like our 6th, minor 7th, and that's pretty much it. You can see, right, like we're just playing with like a few voices here, but it's all about just choosing a few notes and sticking to that. You know, you could go in here and start doing like all this kind of crazy stuff, and these might even be notes that are in the scale, right? But you can hear that it's always going to be more impactful if it's simpler like this. Like that already is a lot more memorable than when I added in all those extra notes. Even if you think it's better by adding more notes, usually adding more notes is just going to kind of mess it up. The last thing I'll talk about with the MIDI here is that choosing where you do the glides is really important. And what I mean by this is you'll notice like some notes overlap, like these two. And you get that wow. It's happening over there. That needs to be kind of a lot more calculated than you would think. Like it needs to be like, it's almost like that is kind of bouncing up, like essentially, like, you know, it's like we're right at the end of the bar there. Like we would never do a there. You can only do like a. And yeah, like I think when you hear these kinds of leads, it's tempting to think that, oh, like yeah, it's just a bunch of notes in there, and you just kind of throw in a bunch of simple notes, and that's gonna do it. But you really need to kind of think about like how the simple notes are gonna fit into the overall track, and ultimately like just kind of telling the story throughout the sequence, essentially. Now, for the sound on this one, it's made with Wavetable. And so this lead is made using sync. And what I mean by this is on like most sort of like analog style synths, they have this thing called Oscillator Sync, where essentially it's kind of like pitching the oscillator up. Right, but it's not really like pitching it. Essentially, it's kind of what it sounds like. And so the key here is that we're using that, and then it's just very heavily modulated. So you can see that we have, it's also on the oscillator 1, but we're not using that, so let's turn that off. So you can see what's happening here is, yeah, on the sync we have an envelope as well as an LFO. So it has this envelope, which is just quickly like that's like the first bit of movement. That gives you like the pluck. But then that LFO is what kind of moves it to all different places. So now you can play a lot of different notes. And it's not just going to sit in the same place. Like if I turn that LFO off, it's too static, you know. The key to this sound is that it's moving all over the place constantly. And so just having that LFO moving kind of slowly like that is a really great way to get that. And then I also have that on the pulse width as well. So yeah, just kind of getting both, you know, again, like, you know, when working with saw waves and square waves, of course, like, it can become kind of simple, the workflow, and just, like, doing the same things over and over, of course. But really, like, This is how you can take saw waves and square waves, because you can do this with a square wave too, and really make them sound like your own and make your own sounds out of them, right? Like, this is one of the most legendary synth sounds ever, and it's using one of the most basic oscillator waveforms that almost every single synth has. And then the other thing with this one is the filtering. Now, this is where the 303 style sound design kind of comes in. If I turn off this filter, you can hear. It's close, but it's not quite. And the reason for this is that you need this like highly resonant filter with some type of distortion on it. And then the key is you're going to put the frequency down a little bit lower, but not like too low. And then you'll notice it's moving around, and that's because I have this key tracking turned on. So essentially what that's doing is now every different note that you play, the filter's going to be in a different place. Right, like it goes lower the lower the notes, and then it opens up the higher the notes you play. And again, just another way to make this lead like really dynamic and really bring it to life and like have lots of movement happening, especially when we have this pattern, which is kind of like bouncing between low notes and high notes. After that, we just have a little bit of glide on the synth, and then the first thing here is this EQ8, and this is just cutting out the low end. The reason for this, so here's without it, and then with it, you'll notice it's just a bit muddy if you leave it in. The reason for that is because, or if you turn it off, it just kind of has a bit more mud without this, essentially, is what I'm saying. It's like, you know, it just cuts out some of those, like, lower frequencies that would mess up the distortion. Like with distortion, if you put in too much low end, like if I just go and like boost the low end here, so it's just gonna get way too distorted. So we just take that and cut out the lows, and now it's gonna distort really clean. And then we just have some overdrive as well as a bit of this amp. So here's without either of them. With the overdrive, and then you can hear the amp just gives it that last little bit of detail, and that's just being blended as well. I've got a bit of EQ just to cut out even more low end because the overdrive tends to add it, and then also cut out some mud there and then boost the highs. We have this delay just doing corner notes as well as this shorter reverb. The last thing on here is the compressor, and I noticed that when I was referencing this, you don't quite get the same level of fatness without the compressor. And I hate to say that because usually I try to avoid compression just for the sake of like way more fatter or whatever. But here's without it. You'll see what I'm talking about. Here's without it. Obviously it's a bit louder. I'll turn that down. That's without it, and then with it. You can hear it just really helps because the problem before was that the low notes were a little bit too quiet and the high notes were a little bit too loud. Now they're even, so you're still getting the super dynamic key tracked synth, all that kind of stuff where it's moving all around, but the notes are just going to be the same volume. Really simple. And the last thing we have down here is just a crash. Yeah, you can hear just every 2 bars, you know, very late 90s trance style stuff. So this is something that they don't really do that much in modern tracks, but it's a nice way to kind of like just have that tension constantly, like you're constantly building it and just dropping it again. You know, it's working its way back up. You know, it's kind of like just one little thing to sort of like reset the sequence every 2 bars. So kind of a simple thing, and I believe that's just a 909 crash as well. So again, just going back to those classic drum machine sounds. Yeah, so that's gonna be it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed. As always, make sure to like this video as well as subscribe, and let me know what you think of this video in the comments. Like I said in the beginning, you can get the full project file, samples, MIDI, presets, everything from this video, including the synth lead and all the individual drum sounds and all that kind of stuff. It's available right at the top of the description for just $5 on my Bandcamp. You know, I don't make a whole lot just off of the videos, but with these sample packs, I'm able to keep going and keep bringing you guys new videos every single day and showing you guys stuff that isn't out there on the internet. So yeah, and in my opinion, this is probably the closest anyone's gotten to the Voodoo People lead without getting the exact same notes. But in terms of like getting the sound in a modern way, I think this is probably one of the best ones that you're going to get. So yeah, link is at the top of the description. Thank you so much for all the support, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you tomorrow with another video.